It starts with a missed breakfast, no explanation, no protest, just a quiet refusal. I'll eat later, they say, but later never comes. The food is made, the plate is served, and yet the fork stays still. Maybe they're just tired, maybe their stomach's upset, maybe they're bored of the same meals. But it's not about the food, it's about something deeper unraveling beneath the surface. You see, appetite is not just a physical urge, it's a declaration that the body wants to continue, that the will to survive is intact, that there's still a desire for fuel, for sensation, for the simple pleasures of salt and sweetness and warmth. So when that appetite begins to wither, it's not just digestion slowing, it's motivation retreating. The drive to engage with the world begins to flicker like a candle nearing its end. It isn't dramatic, it isn't loud. That's what makes it so easy to miss. It slips beneath the radar because we expect dying to look like suffering. We imagine pain, crying, chaos, but sometimes dying looks like silence. It looks like skipped meals and smaller portions, like soup going cold on the table, like someone who once loved your cooking suddenly saying, "I'm not hungry tonight," with a gentle, almost embarrassed smile. The family often doesn't see it for what it is. They urge them to eat, push plates closer, suggest their favorite foods. "Come on, you used to love this." And sometimes the person obliges, takes a bite or two, chews slowly, swallows, but it's not about taste anymore. It's not even about politeness. It's about surrender. They're not resisting life, they're simply releasing their grip. And part of that release is detaching from the cycle of hunger and nourishment. You have to understand, hunger is more than biology. It's rooted in drive and desire and the will to continue. When we lose that hunger, it means something internal is shifting. It's not depression, not always. It's not defiance, it's something quieter, something older, like a biological recognition that the end is approaching and the effort to sustain the body is no longer necessary. The machinery of survival begins to wind down. They're not being difficult. They're not trying to worry anyone. In fact, they often try to hide it. They don't want to be a burden. They don't want the fuss. So they'll pretend to eat, move food around the plate, say they had a big lunch earlier. But if you're watching, you'll notice the pattern. Meals that once brought joy now bring fatigue. It's not about the food. It's about detachment. This is where many people misunderstand what's happening. They think it's a medical issue to be fixed. They chase supplements, meal replacements, feeding tubes. And yes, sometimes those are necessary, but not always. Sometimes the body isn't malfunctioning. It's obeying something ancient, something woven into our biology, the knowledge that every cycle must come to a close. Hunger came with life. Its absence arrives with death. People imagine death as a sudden moment, a flat line, a dramatic final breath. But more often, it's a long, slow drift. The body has its own rituals. It lets go piece by piece, and appetite is one of the first threads it snips, not as punishment, not as failure, but as preparation. The body is intelligent. It knows when to hold on, and it knows when to begin letting go. This shrinking of appetite is mirrored in other areas too. Conversation shrinks, movement shrinks, ambition shrinks. The same way the plate grows emptier, the calendar does too. Things that once mattered lose their urgency. The future becomes irrelevant. The present becomes everything. Not because they're giving up, but because they're preparing. There's a difference, and it's one most people don't see until it's too late. The shrinking of appetite isn't the only sign, but it's often the first, and it tells you more than any blood test, more than any chart, because it isn't data, it's instinct. It's the soul withdrawing its investment from the physical. And if you're willing to see it, really see it, you'll realize what you're witnessing isn't just bodily decline, it's the beginning of closure. Not of meaning, but of effort. So what do you do when you see it? You don't force, you don't panic. You listen, you sit, you notice, you offer, not pressured. You stop trying to fix, and you start trying to understand. Because the food isn't the issue. The issue is will. The issue is that something is shifting, and you're being invited to witness it, not interfere with it. You're being asked to show presence, not control. And maybe that's the hardest part, to watch someone you love, someone who raised you or stood beside you, slowly disengage from the very act of sustaining life. Not violently, not urgently, but gently, like the tide pulling back from the shore. Silently, inevitably, without permission. In the beginning, the world is wide. We stretch into it with laughter and ambition. Friends are everywhere. Invitations are frequent. Conversations fill the air like birdsong. But with age, that vast horizon begins to contract. Slowly, imperceptibly, the circle begins to shrink. And most people don't notice until it's already small. The old ones, our elders, they feel it first like the cooling of a once warm room. Phone calls become fewer. Some of that is natural. Loved ones move away, friends pass, the world keeps turning. But there's another layer underneath, a decision not to reach out, a silence that becomes comfortable, not because the energy it takes to sustain relationships feels heavier than it used to. Social currency runs dry, and solitude becomes less a condition and more a preference. They start turning down invitations. They stop attending gatherings, not because they're bitter, not even because they're tired, though sometimes they are, but because the pull to participate weakens. What once felt urgent, birthdays, dinners, visits, now feels distant, like a show they've already seen. Their focus shifts inward like a tide pulling back from the sand. And if you're not watching, you'll think they're just being antisocial. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is preparation. The soul is beginning to close its windows, one at a time. The door stays shut, the phone stays unanswered, not out of anger, not even out of sadness, but out of instinct. There comes a time when the external becomes noise and they crave silence, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of peace. The living tend to fight this. They push against it. You need to get out more, they say. You'll feel better if you see people. And sometimes that's true, but other times the refusal isn't depression, it's detachment. Not because they've lost love for the world, but because they've begun to release it. Their hands are slowly unclenching from the grip of daily life, and they're not asking to be pulled back in. You'll see it in the way they sit longer in one place, the way they stop checking the mail, the way they seem content watching the same show on repeat. What they're doing is settling, nesting, shrinking their territory to something they can manage, something they can control. The home becomes a sanctuary, then a room, then a chair, and eventually just a place by the window where the sun hits right. The friendships that remain are old and deep, not loud, not frequent, but solid, often unspoken, a quiet presence, not a constant one. They don't want new people. They don't want to be known all over again. They want to be with those who already understand, who don't require effort or explanations. Relationships become distilled, fewer but heavier, like thickened syrup, more potent in less volume. At some point, you stop hearing about next year. There's no mention of upcoming birthdays, no plans for summer, no speculation about what's around the corner. The future, once a stage for hope and possibility, shrinks into irrelevance, not because they've given up, but because something deep inside has shifted its orientation. They are no longer reaching forward. They are retreating from time's momentum quietly with precision. You'll notice it in their speech. The way they talk about time loses its reach. Someday becomes used to, and when I grow older turns into back when I was younger. There's a gravitational pull away from tomorrow and toward yesterday. Conversations drift toward childhood, early jobs, first loves, lost friends. The past becomes warmer, more vivid, more immediate than anything still to come. And when you bring up the future innocently, out of habit they respond with soft evasion. You ask about plans and they deflect. You propose something months from now and they nod politely, but their eyes are somewhere else. It's not forgetfulness, it's detachment. The kind that comes not from despair, but from a realignment of energy, a subtle internal decision to stop projecting themselves into a world they're already beginning to leave. There is a quiet intelligence to it, not the kind that comes from intellect, but the kind born of the body. The psyche knows when its time is narrowing, and without drama it begins to conserve. They stop investing in long-term outcomes. They stop imagining what their life might look like a year from now. Not because they lack imagination, but because that particular act of imagining no longer serves them. The future becomes too heavy to carry. It demands attention, planning, energy, and they begin to intuitively realize that those are resources they can't afford to waste. So they don't. They focus instead on the immediate, the taste of tea, the weight of a blanket, the way the afternoon light touches the floorboards. The moment becomes everything, not as a philosophy, but as a necessity. You might notice a soft indifference to things they once cared about. Not because they're depressed, but because those things were anchored in a future they're no longer part of. The unfinished novel, the garden plan, the stack of books waiting to be read, none of them carry the same urgency. These aren't signs of failure. They're signs of acceptance. Not a giving up, but a letting go. Even celebrations take on a different tone. Birthdays are no longer milestones. Holidays are less about festivity and more about quiet observation. They watch others celebrate and smile gently, almost from a distance. It's not disconnection. It's a repositioning. They are slowly becoming observers of time rather than participants in its race. And there's a strange peace in that distance. The news becomes background noise. The state of the world still matters to them in principle, but no longer in practice. They may still hold opinions, but the outcome of elections, the course of economies, the arc of social change, these are things they no longer feel tethered to. Not because they're indifferent to humanity, but because they no longer see themselves as a part of its unfolding narrative. There is often a return to repetition. The same chair,